This is the advanced co-founder discussion. We had the co-founder 101 discussion before, where we talked about should you have a co-founder, how do you find a co-founder, things of that nature. Now we're going in the 102 co-founder. We're going to go over more advanced topics today. But before I get started, let me introduce myself and the Founder Institute briefly. I'm Adeo Ressi. I'm the CEO of the Founder Institute. I'm also a venture capitalist at Expansive Ventures. Serial entrepreneur. I've had co-founders. I've not had co-founders, so I know a decent bit about this subject. And we have an esteemed guest joining us today, who I'll introduce in a moment. But just quickly to tell you about the Founder Institute. The Founder Institute is a program that helps you launch a fast-growing technology company. We currently operate in over 100 cities worldwide, and we're enrolling in dozens of cities right now. So if you're interested in launching a company and you'd like to learn more, you can go to fi.co, or if you just want to skip the line and apply, you can go to fi.co/lead. So let me jump in and let's call on Jessica Alter to screen right now. She's the founder and CEO of FounderDating. FounderDating is one of the best tools out there available today if you're looking to find a co-founder and really germinate, I guess you could say, a relationship between you and a co-founder. FounderDating is probably, the premier place to do so. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about FounderDating, and then we'll jump into the agenda? Jessica?
Sure. Hi, Adeo. Fun to be back. So FounderDating is really LinkedIn for entrepreneurs. Anyone can join and be part of the community of entrepreneurs and advisors, companies, and then part of the network is a very curated co-founder network. So people that are ready to start something, either a side project or a company, and I can get into that. We keep it curated both for quality and skill set. So it's the co-founder portion of the network is 50% engineers. So once you've been vouched for and get on, you can actually look for people based on primary skill sets, areas of interest, city, company, everything like that. So it is really about finding the people and we like to say experiential information you need to do the things you want and need to do as an entrepreneur faster and more successfully. So that could be finding a co-founder, it could be finding awesome advisors, it could be just getting the help of experienced people on important questions that you have, or general networking. So,
and when you apply, you need to get people to vouch for you, and it's not just show up and suddenly you get a co-founder. There is a bit of a process that you go through to make sure that the people who come in are serious. So this truly is a curated network.
Yeah. So again, anyone can join FounderDating and sort of take advantage of the general community. To be an advisor, to be considered an advisor on the network and have people reach out to you for that, you need to be vouched for, as you just said. Also, to be a co-founder, you need to be vouched for, but actually, co-founder is the most selective part of the network, because we want people to be both high quality, but also really serious about not just starting a company, but at least a meaningful side project. And that's been super important, and one of the reasons people love us is because it's not like contractors and people just trying to sell their services or something like that. It's people that actually want to be a partner and start something.
And there's what's not to love. You are the premier destination to help people find co-founders, which is so let's talk about what we're going to cover today. So we're going to go through how to split up tasks with your co-founder that you identify. So, this is more advanced than the last session. Mm-hmm. How to structure a relationship with your co-founder. How to divide the equity with your co-founder. That one's going to be fun. I get 100%, you get 0, and how to handle the challenges and conflicts that will inevitably come up with co-founder relationships. Now, for everyone on the webinar, you have a little questions area. If you want to ask a question, we would love to hear your questions. So if you pound your questions out in the little box, my team will be squirreling away and reviewing them, and we'll try and get all your questions answered as we go through the various topics today. So let's jump right into it. How to split up tasks and divide responsibilities with your co-founder. Sounds a little easier said than done, I would imagine. You know, I have a venture firm. We have partners in the firm. You know, there's like, I'm better at this. No, you're not. You know, so what's your advice there, Jessica, about, and I'm happy to share from my experience.
Yeah, no, please. So I think there's a couple, there's sort of two buckets. There's things that, like, sort of as you said, there's things that you know you don't know.
Yeah, right.
And there's
a lot.
Right, but there's actually stuff that you don't know. So the first bucket is the
also
stuff
a lot. Right.
Probably bigger, actually. So the first bucket is what you can really plan to split up or try to split up beforehand, like as you go into it, and it's usually the bigger stuff. So like, I'm going to handle design. I'm going to handle engineering. We're going to, you know, do product together. I'm going to handle marketing. I'm going to handle sales. So I mean, I think in that, generally speaking, I mean, part of it is having someone that has complementary skill sets to you and knowing what's important for the business that you're starting. So like,
right.
If you're starting a SaaS company and no one's handling sales, you got a problem.
Oh, okay. Wait. So now let me. Okay, you just said quite a few things that need a little bit of clarification. So it seems to me that the co-founders need to be incredibly self-aware before this conversation even happens, because to be like, well, I'm going to take design would mean that, you know, hey, I think I'm a pretty good designer, or hey, I think I'm pretty good at business. And
right.
If you need to be self-aware to even know what you know and know what you don't know. And
yeah, I think that's true. And then the other thing is, I feel like we're talking about this as if you're structuring it and you've never done anything together before. And in sort of this webinar 101, one of the big things that I try to drive home is like, even if you've just met, you should at least work on a side project together so that like, you know what the other person is actually good at too. And you sort of do have a bit of a groove going, even if it's small, even if it's a weekend, like you can get a pretty good sense for things. So like, you'll know if they're not a good designer, right? But like, people usually have one or two primary skill sets. Like, I'm not a designer. I'm a design appreciator. But I cannot sit down in front of Photoshop or anything like that and actually design stuff. I'm happy to give critiques, but I'm not the designer.
But even with that said, right? So there's going to be. You also indicated another thing, which is complex, which is the things that nobody's good at and nobody wants to do, right?
Right.
So, I mean, like, I'm not particularly good at taking out the trash, yet I do it a lot. I'm not particularly good at mopping the floor. I've done that before. I do a range of crap that no one else wants to do. And it's oftentimes those kind of weird areas where nobody has any skill that creates conflict, right?
Yeah.
Because no one wants to do them,
yeah.
and no one's particularly good at them. What do you recommend about that?
Well, I think you should ask yourself if it's core to your business. If it's taking out the trash, then it's not. And if it's, sales on a enterprise software.
Someone still needs to do it, right?
Yeah. But my advice is different. So if it's sales on enterprise software and no one wants to do it, you should either find someone who's going to be a third co-founder or something pretty close to that does, or learn to love it, or change your business. Because like, if you have something that's core and no one wants to do it, you have a problem. If it's something that's not core and no one loves, there's a difference between not wanting to do it and not loving to do it. Like, I don't love taking out the trash, but I do it. So I think that part of being an entrepreneur is being good enough at a lot of things to get to certain milestones. And if you don't feel like you're motivated to do some of the stuff that isn't necessarily super fun, then you should probably rethink, being a co-founder. If
That's interesting. So you should divide up the unfun things as well.
I mean, sometimes
right?
you don't need to divide them up. Sometimes it just happens.
Right.
But yeah, I think that you should. And one thing is, you don't want one person doing all the unfun things and the other person doing, because I think that breeds resentment.
Well, I'll tell you. I'm going to tell a funny story about this. So I was having dinner with Larry Page not that long ago, and I was like, Larry, Google's doing some cool stuff like this. He's like, Sergey's doing it, and I'm like, well, what about this? Sergey's doing it, and it was clearly like he's like, wait, he was in resentful mode. That he had he's running the company, steering the numbers, and
someone else is
doing all the cool projects, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, to some extent, you also don't want every one person to pick up all the grunt work and become resentful, right?
Right, or unless they love that stuff. I mean, there's COOs and VP of Ops people that love some of that stuff, and they know they're good at it.
Right. So Eric is asking, would you write all these tasks up and sort of divide them out? Is that
So I think a big theme of this conversation and what I was trying to say before is you don't know all of them.
Yes, true.
And you're never going to at the beginning, right? To take an extreme example, I don't think that Larry and Sergey sat down in the 90s and said, if we ever do self-driving cars, I get to do it. So,
right. Who's going to do the projects?
Right. So you don't know. So you can't. Some of the stuff you can, I'm going to handle incorporation and that, it's boring, but you have to do it. Or I'll liaise with the attorneys or stuff like that. I think the key thing about a co-founder relationship is not actually having everything so divided up. It's being able to talk about it and get to a decision pretty quickly and be fine with it. So the thing that is important, and I wrote an article a while ago on Steve Blink's blog called How We Fight. I know this is sort of a topic for another time, and it was really saying you can't get to all the decisions you're going to have to get to, and so you have to make sure that you can have discussions and even if you don't agree, get past them quickly and make decisions together quickly. That's actually the key. It's not actually the division of tasks every single time.
Well, part of the reason why I asked, though, is that one of the things that I see happen very commonly is this, resentment levels, right? And when things don't feel 50-50, very quickly, or co-foundery, it's God, I'm constantly doing all the grunt work and he's constantly doing all the cool work. That's where things can get bad fast.
Yeah. But there is a conversation to be had about division of responsibilities. My point is just that you won't cover all of it because you don't know all of it.
No, and I agree with that. So, being self-aware, trying to understand the things that need to be done, putting them on the list, discussing them. Now, you did talk, you brought up that SaaS thing and not aware of all these things. So maybe we can, on this division of responsibilities, it sounds like, regular communication is critical.
Yeah. But also, if you're not sure, I think that's a red flag too. If you're if you start off a little unhappy, that's probably bad. So, I think you're not going to be doing when you shouldn't.
Do you mean let me clarify what you mean by that. Do you mean that you feel like you got the short end of the stick?
Yeah, if you feel like that right away, you're in trouble.
Yeah, okay.
But my point is actually bigger, which is you're not only going to do one thing. A lot of people get into something, they're I'm the best, and I'm just giving this example, I love design. I'm the best designer. That's awesome, and you'll probably design for the first year. But as a co-founder, you're not going to do just one thing. So if you only like design, don't be an entrepreneur.
Don't be a co-founder.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, tech, you could probably maybe start a small boutique design agency.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So don't be a tiny in a business where you're a co-founder doing something else. Yeah, that's very good advice. I mean, a lot of first-time and early entrepreneurs make the mistake. Oh, I'm going to do this business so I can do more of what I love. So I like programming, so I'm going to build enterprise software. I like design, so I'm going to build an app. The truth of the matter is, within the first few months, your app building will go down and your crap work will go up.
Right. And it's not all crap work, but you have to love. I actually love doing 8 things in a day. I like that. So you have to, in some ways, enjoy that, or at least 4.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's a lot of crap work. Maybe not all crap work. All right.
So all crap work. I mean, you will design, and eventually maybe you'll run design, but don't get into it thinking I'll get to do this day in and day out, for the next 7 years, because that's pretty unlikely. And you can see any of the big companies that have the people that are running them, they're not doing their quote unquote what people think of as their vocation. Right.
Right. Larry is not he doesn't even do algorithms anymore. So, another question that was asked, and if you have other questions, please pop them in the chat. We're going to go into structuring your agreement in a moment. But, let's go back to this taking out the trash as a proxy for what to outsource, right? Because, when you start out and you have no money, obviously everyone needs to take out the trash. But as you start to grow, what are the things that you and your co-founder want to keep in the company, and what are some of the things that you want to push out of the business, outsource, get rid of? Obviously, taking the trash you want to outsource as soon as reasonable. What are some of the other things that is easy to say?
Yeah. I think I'd love your thoughts on this. I don't know. It's funny, the take out the trash example is apt. When people ask me what I do, I jokingly say I take out the trash. I think for a long time, longer than you would probably imagine, your job as a CEO is to make sure things are getting done. And if it's not getting done, you do it. You can't always delegate. And so, you got to be okay with that. It really, I thought about this question. It really depends on the business that you're in and what you can outsource. Again, I hate to use.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll use the sales example. You shouldn't outsource sales at the beginning. One of the founders should be doing that. They should be learning. Once you get to a certain point and you understand it, you can outsource it. So it really depends what you think is very key to your business. If it's a tech business, I wouldn't outsource development. I wouldn't outsource product. I wouldn't outsource sales. There are, I guess.
You can't outsource fundraising either, for that matter. So
definitely not. Yeah, I mean, you can outsource the normal stuff, legal, bookkeeping, FP&A. I'm a big fan of having a designer on there early. I think the tension is a lot of designers are used to working as contractors. I'm a huge proponent of more designers becoming entrepreneurs if they want to do other stuff beyond design. I think we need more of it, but it is possible to work with someone that way and have them be involved, and you may not need them all the time. But I mean, the not so helpful answer is it sort of depends.
Right, and so well, let's move on to some more tactical, hard topics, but I just want to make a comment on something you said before we go into agreements, which is, I think that you said when something's not getting done in the business, the job of the entrepreneur is to get it done. And, I'm so sensitive because resentment is the major cause of failure in these co-founder relationships. So you really need to not feel God, every time something doesn't get done, I'm the one to do it. you need to have those open and frank, regular conversations with your co-founders or co-founder and figure it out, right? It has to be a discussion, not always the, savior mode where it's like, oh, it's not getting done, I'll do it, right? But let's go on to the co-founder agreement. This is tricky. What does a co-founder agreement entail and how do you set it up? Like, are there good templates that you can recommend? Any terms that you think are super important?
I'd actually love to hear what you guys say about this. So the Founder Dating Discuss, which is sort of like the Quora for entrepreneurs, there's probably 6 or 7 questions about this, and I looked at them just to see what other people were saying before this. I think the question is, what's the concern, right? If you're doing it or what are you trying to prevent? So if you're doing it to make sure that like expectations are the same, and you want to make sure like I'm handling product and he's handling engineering and she's handling sales, I think you can do it. I don't think it needs to be like a legal document that it's more about, I think there's a version that's more about getting down on paper what you're agreeing to, being able to see it or look at it and, agree. Like,
right. Well, when you set up the company, you're technically doing a co-founder agreement.
Right. So the other part is sort of like equity investing, and that's going to be part of it anyway. That vesting is sort of the protection of like if someone leaves. So to me, there's like an agreement that is like a legal agreement that is about. Typically, legal agreements are preventing bad things from happening. They're not making good things happen. Just as like a form of.
So the way I look at it is your co-founder. I mean, so there's a variety of ways that co-founder relationships happen. Sometimes a company exists and you bring on a co-founder later. David Sachs was recruited to Zenefits. He has the title of COO, but he was recruited as a co-founder. But the company had been operating and was huge at the time that the offer was made. So, co-founders can come really at any point in the business history. But so you can either be before you incorporate or maybe long after, right? But generally speaking, for me, the memorialization of a co-founder relationship is in the corporate documents of the company, because you're essentially giving them equity. And usually founders have often common, but sometimes they have founder stock. We actually encourage people to take founder stock.
Yeah, I encourage founder stock too, and you might want to explain what that is.
Yeah, and so if you're bringing in a co-founder, generally speaking, you memorialize it by giving them founder stock. So founder stock, so if you have founder stock, you essentially create a situation in the company where you will probably have at least 3 classes of stock very quickly. You'll have common stock that you use as a basis for employees, option plans, things like that. You'll have founder stock, and you'll probably have some investors that will take some sort of stock. And this will happen pretty quickly within the first year of a business. Generally speaking, founder stock has some protections for the founder. So there's something called super voting rights, and this is now very common in Silicon Valley, and it allows you, even though you have 1 share of stock, you get 10 votes. That's 1 to 10 is something that you see pretty common. It might also have some additional protective provisions so that the founder has a say over when the company does something. For example, taking on an investment or something like that. The founders have protective provisions, the right to block those things from happening because they have this special founder stock. So there's a variety of these things. We have something called Class F. If you go to fi.co/Class F, it's all, founder stock is all there freely for you to use, at least in America, and the provisions are well outlined. But Yeah, so giving your co-founder founder stock is a way to memorialize it. What are some other things in the formation? You mentioned vesting. We think that's super important.
So yeah, just to be clear, if you have a co-founder, you guys should both be vesting.
Now, people don't know what vesting is outside of America. So, and I'm sure we have people from all around the world. Let me explain it to you very quickly. Let's say you own, I don't know, we'll make it 50-50. So you own 50% of the stock and your co-founder owns 50% of the stock. Well, you don't get 50% day one. And each day that you stay at the company, you earn up to your 50%. So there's a vesting period, normally 4 years. There's usually it might vest monthly, it could vest quarterly. So at each month you get 1/48 of the 50%. And a lot of times there's a cliff. So if you leave inside of a year, usually the cliff is a year, you get nothing. And now why is vesting important? Jessica?
Oh, why vesting? Yeah. I mean, vesting is, in my opinion, if you have someone that you're working with, it's the most important thing, because the idea is exactly what you said. You're earning this equity as you work. So if you don't stay there, you didn't earn it. And so it's basically it's a way to earn as you work, but if there's a schedule to it, and it's, the schedule Adeo just described is pretty much the well accepted schedule. And so you have no concern. You should have really no concerns. You shouldn't say, well, what's going to happen if you're gone in 2 years? You know what's going to happen. He or she is going to get only 50% of the equity, and the rest will go back into the pool. So it really just takes, it's A, you're earning your keep, and B, it really just takes away that concern of like, well, what will happen if they leave? They don't get 50%. Or
they get less, and just to go in on this, so we operate all around the world. You might see the map above me over there. The reality is, outside of America, vesting is very uncommon, and it shouldn't be, because it's so important for fairness. But the other thing is that in a lot of developed markets where vesting occurs, investors mandate it. Right? So what happens is, if you and your co-founder agree to do vesting, when you take money from an investor, the clock started when you started the company. Otherwise, the investors will say the clock starts right now, right? And that's really terrible for you, because you may have worked for a year, you've taken money, and now you have zero equity because they start the vesting clock, right?
Right.
Someone has to explain the term cliff. So it's just a vernacular.
It is what it sounds like, really.
Yeah. Whereas you don't stay for the mandated period of time. Let's say 1 year. You don't get it. You get nothing. So usually the cliff is 1 year, and then on that 1 year anniversary, you get 12/48, or 1/4 of the equity in one big bulk grant. I hope that was that clear, Jessica? I thought so. Maybe.
Basically, it means that, I think it's clear. So just to recap, I feel two things about a co-founder agreement. There's the agreement of division of responsibilities and stuff like that, where it's I want to make sure that we're on the same page. If you want to do that, I think that's great. I don't think you need a legal document. I think you should write it down and make sure you're on the same page. You're literally looking at the same thing and both giving, or all three of you, or whomever it is, giving a thumbs up. That's really to align and make sure that you're both in a place where you actually agree and there's no confusion, and you're welcome to revisit it. It doesn't need to be a legal document. For the legal protection stuff, I think two parts. One is, I agree with Adeo. It's mostly in your incorporation stuff and mostly covered by vesting. And it shouldn't be a conversation, and we'll get into this in a second. Equity shouldn't be a conversation you have for the first time when you're incorporating. And then the second part that I think I'm guessing a lot of people have questions about is like, well, what happens before we actually incorporate, if we start working on a project, etc., and mostly about the intellectual property stuff. And I think two things I'll say about that. One is I think people are way more concerned about that than maybe they need to be because of like.
You mean intellectual property? They're way more concerned about
Yeah, like what if they steal my idea, blah blah blah, and I'll blame Facebook for that, or the Facebook story for that. So that's number one, and also ideas are completely worthless. It's all about execution. But once you do build something, I think there's plenty of sort of, if you're really concerned about it, on democracy and stuff like that, there's some very, standard agreements about intellectual property, etc.
Well, when you set up the corporation documents, they'll do all the intellectual.
Yeah, I'm talking about before that.
Right.
If you start working on stuff on the side, etc., that's when people get squirmy. And you can do that. But honestly, if you really, a written document is a written document. So as long as you say over email, like, this is going to go to the company and or to me if it doesn't work out. If my biggest thing is if you are really worried that someone is going to steal something from you, you probably shouldn't have them be your co-founder.
Well, or you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. You're just too.
Yeah, both. But if you're worried about anyone stealing stuff, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. If you're worried about this person, that's a red flag.
Right. A couple quick questions from the listeners. William was asking, sounds like founder stock might take away power from the investors, and that might hurt your ability to raise funds. What are your thoughts? Every great company on earth has founder stock, and in many cases, they've raised billions of dollars. The truth of the matter is, if you're not kicking ass, your investors are going to take away your founder stock provisions anyway, and some investors may take them away if you are kicking ass. So, you might as well have them there to begin with, and then it's a negotiation.
No investor is going to say, "Oh, you have founder stock. I don't want to invest."
And then Gordon was asking, this stuff sounds pretty hard. Should we have a business coach to assist in the agreement and setting up tasks with your co-founder? Is having an experienced mentor helpful in this scenario? I don't have an answer there. Maybe you have an answer, Jessica, that's better than my no answer.
So two things. I don't think you need a coach. It's always good to have an advisor just to bounce things off of. But again, I think the way we're talking about it, it may seem like, oh, you sit down and you just have one discussion and you got to bang it all out. And that's not true. You should at least, please, I'm begging you, work with this person a little bit. And so some of it just comes out naturally. Like, they're going to handle product because they are great at it. Or that's one of the reasons that you're partnering together. And again, don't try to cover everything because it's impossible and pretty much futile. I think as long as you have the major stuff covered and you have the biggest thing is having a good working relationship.
Right. It's like left hand, right hand type thing. And if you don't feel like this person left or right hand, maybe you shouldn't be working either. Amy was asking if you're bootstrapping the business with credit and personal cash, and one is investing a lot more than the other, how do you handle investing? Let me give my answer on that quick, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and the
other scenario, by the way, that I think breeds a lot of resentment is when someone is not full-time and the other person is full-time.
Oh, that one's brutal too. So let's cover that as well. What I recommend doing with the investing because that creates a lot of resentment, like the I'm full-time, you're part-time. So what I recommend there is that you invest it as debt, not equity, and then when an equity event comes, you can either choose to convert it like an investor or have it repaid. Most of the time, you'll convert it, and then that takes the money off the table, right? Because your debt is the best thing that you can get in a business. And so if you're providing the business debt, if the business goes out of business, you sell the tables and the debt holder gets paid back first. So I recommend doing it as debt and keeping your equity agreements the same. I don't know, Jessica, if you have a different view on that.
No, I think that's good. I don't have religion about it. I think you probably have a little bit more experience with that portion of it.
Yeah.
I do have a pretty strong.
Yeah, let's go on that work balance one you were talking about, because that's another one that pisses people off. Still has a job, and I'm working full time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's like 3 scenarios I've seen. One is, and I love Startup Weekend, but this is pretty standard. So people go to Startup Weekend or a similar type hackathon. They come back and you say, like, do you have a co-founder? They're like, yeah. Where is he or she? And it's a Saturday, right? And you're like at some workshop. Oh, they're at home. It's like, okay, then they're not your co-founder. Like, that's okay, by the way. That's not what Startup Weekend's for. It's for working on stuff and getting excited, etc. But just because you meet someone and work on something at a hackathon does not make them your co-founder. And the faster you realize that, the better your offer will be. The second is you actually know each other, and there is a timeline towards when this person can leave their job. That's actually the most okay one. As long as you've actually had the conversation and they can say, we need to get to either this milestone or we need to raise this amount of money or whatever it is. And you feel like that's not going to be longer than, I would say, 6 to 8 months. The third is...
I was going to say 3 to 6 months. So, yeah 6 to 8 is long, but sure, 3 to 8. Yeah.
And then the third scenario is sort of like, you don't know when this person is going to be able to leave their job. They haven't been able to give a real timeline for it. It's super, I think Adeo will agree with me, it's super, super dangerous because it breeds just a ton of resentment. And I think you end up spinning your wheels. So you end up super frustrated. You end up spending a lot of your time dealing with that frustration and not making progress where you could be making progress. So time is like your most important.
Excuses. Another thing in that last quarter, they're like, "Oh, I'll quit now. Oh, I just got a raise, and my son is going to school. I can't do it this week. I'll do it next month." And it's like next month, and that's also quite bad.
Right. So let me just stop for 1 second. So 2 years ago, or whenever it was, 3 years ago when we first started, I on a plane wrote this post called like questions you should ask your potential co-founder, the master list. And a really important question that people skip is like, what kind of business do you want and what's your risk profile? Like, if you want to build a lifestyle business, totally cool. Awesome. Make sure your co-founder does too. If they want to like swing for the fences and you want a lifestyle business, like not a fit.
Let me explain though what a lifestyle business is. A lifestyle business is a business that doesn't necessarily grow very quickly, isn't very ambitious, but might provide you with enough income and stability to live a comfortable life without working that hard. You still.
Right. I wouldn't say it's not ambitious. I would just say it's not like venture-backed IPOing.
Right. And
by the way, this is what most businesses are. So that's fine, but make sure you guys agree. And then, like, what's your risk profile? If you're both working now, you should definitely have the conversation about like when you would be willing to leave your job and sort of the uncomfortable but frank conversation about finances, because that's reality. If you need to send your kid to private school and you can't never not have a salary, like, you got to say that.
So let's talk about the other uncomfortable thing to talk about with your co-founder: how to divide the equity. Right? So, I mean, there is no right answer in my view. I mean, there are some best practices. We talked about this a little bit last time, so let's dive into a more detail here. I remember your view last time, but give us your view on, like, all right, we got 2 co-founders. Let's start with 2.
Yeah.
What do you recommend?
I don't have like a split I recommend, but I don't believe in 50-50. That's my
Now,
unpopular viewpoint.
when you say you don't believe in 50-50, does that mean if there was like 50, or excuse me, 45, 10, 45? Would that work? You don't mean, I don't believe in equal distribution between two people, because there's a bit of a difference.
I think it means that like I think at the end of the day, that usually breeds unhealthy like relationships. Mark Suster has a great article about this. There's an article on our blog that was just with an interview with. So there's two things. I don't believe in 50-50. I think one person is usually giving more, and I want to caveat this, and this is so important if we take nothing else from this. Bringing the idea is worth zero equity. Ideas are not valuable, and like I know you'll back me up on this. Like when I talk to people and they're like, "But it was my idea," okay, like 1,000,000 people have your idea, and that's
zero.
not. Yeah, like that is not because you're not awesome and smart, but like that has no value. So you have to be bringing other stuff, and I think when you do that, there is usually someone that is, bringing a little bit more, taking on a little bit more, made progress on their own. It usually is, there is usually a person where like the buck stops here, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that's not the other person's company too. I was just going to quote Lucas Bewald, who's the founder and CEO of Crowdflower, and he sort of famously got kicked out as the CEO and then was brought back. And, we asked him in a recent blog post interview, like, do you think entrepreneurs are too worried about equity and dilution? And he said, this is verbatim, I'm quoting, the most pervasive myth that I see with early stage entrepreneurs is there's something magical about 51% equity, or that they don't want to go below 50%, and it's totally misguided. If you're running a business for a long time, you're going to do lots of things that change everybody's amounts of equity. So the biggest thing is to make sure that people feel good about where they are and not quibble over 5% or 1%, etc.
What I would say is I agree with your point that 50-50 isn't, because what ends up happening, if you start fighting, there's no way to resolve it. Mm-hmm. But you could give equity to an advisor in the middle, so it could be like 45-10-45, just as a simple math, and that might prevent the stalemates.
Yeah.
Because inevitably you're going to have a stalemate, and if you have an equal vote, you'll never resolve it, right?
I don't think that things get resolved because one person has more equity. And if that is the card you play, it's going to get unhealthy quickly.
Yeah.
So, like, and a great example of this is your board, right? Like, you could have a well-known investor who's unhappy, and it doesn't matter how much they own. If they own 1% of the company or 15%, you're going to have a really hard time. And so I just don't think that, like, I agree there should be sort of a buck stops here, but I don't think that, can you imagine if your co-founder constantly said to you, well, I own 51%, so this is how we're going to do it. That is a recipe for breaking up quickly.
Yeah, but someone needs to have the control, right?
Yeah, because but it shouldn't. The amount you give in equity should reflect that that's already true. It shouldn't be because you gave them more equity.
Right.
The equity is a signal.
Right, and so I could go either way. My view on the equity splits, and we have some audience questions here, so I'll jump down to the
sure we do.
But like my view on it is, if it really, like, some of the great companies of our era were founded with equal splits, right? But
some were not.
Many were not as well, right? So it can be done either way, but if you go equal, you're gonna want to have a tiebreaker for sure. Otherwise, you're gonna possibly run into a stalemate situation. The worst scenario that can actually happen is a lot of times, like, one co-founder becomes inactive, but doesn't want to give their equity back. and you can't do anything because it's 50-50. And so if you don't have someone in the middle to tie break, you'll have, 50% of a company where the other 50% is controlled by an absentee landlord. So,
well, okay, I don't want people to get scared by that because that's not very probable, and usually if they leave, they leave.
Well, I've seen it, not 10%, but, 5-6% of equal co-founder relationships where there's a split, especially without vesting, which is, there's another problem with vesting because you can debate like, oh, I'm still active, right? Don't you see me writing a blog post? It's like once a week, and you're like, dude, you haven't done any work for, you wrote a blog post a week ago, and that was your first work in months. So having that tiebreaker in the middle on the equity is really important if you decide to go 50-50. Otherwise, I agree with you, Jessica, probably someone needs to be in charge, and you really shouldn't have to go back to the equity agreements ever. That's the best. So Jess was asking, should equity always be split in the middle? As we said, it could go either way. And, then she was asking about dilution 101. What happens when you start bringing people in? How much concern should we have with dilution? How does it work? So basically, dilution always happens in one way, pro rata, right? And, as Jessica well said, you should assume that you're going to get diluted quite a bit. And I don't know if you want to add anything on dilution. I can talk a little bit more about it.
Well, I want to add one thing about the 50-50 because this is one of the things that is important. I think a lot of times people do 50, and just be honest with yourself and ask this. I think a lot of times people do 50-50 so they don't have to have a difficult conversation. And that's like a humongo mistake. You can tweet that quote. Not wanting to have a difficult conversation is a bad sign, number one. Number two, like it's just super painful it's more painful not to have it. And so I think.
Well, the pain comes out later. So you save yourself today. That's a rookie mistake. Like not doing something hard today just leads to doing something even harder later.
Yeah. So, yeah. Is there one way that works? No, because then we wouldn't be having this conversation and debate. But I just think that there's a myth that it always should be 50-50 and I deserve them, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, you want to build a huge company or a great company. And like, is it about 5%? Is it about, 8%? It's just really not. It's about like feeling like you're excited to get up in the morning every day and work hard and be able to do it. And if you don't feel like that, you have a problem.
Ownership is a huge myth. I mean, okay. Let me explain dilution 101 for you, okay? If people want your stock, it will be more valuable, right? Now, if you and your co-founder are the only two owners of the stock, the only two people who might want to buy it are you and your co-founder. Right. So the value of the stock is basically whatever you will pay the other person for to get the stock from them. Now, the more people that you bring in as owners of your stock, investors, employees through option pool, partners, friends, advisors, whatever else, the more valuable the stock becomes because there are more people interested in owning it, right? So dilution is inherently a good thing because it's demonstrating that more people want to own your stock. It's not like food rations. Holy crap, if I don't have tons of rice, I'm going to die. No, stock is not food rations, right? The more people, right. The more people that have the stock, the more demand there is,
Mm-hmm.
and the higher the value of the company goes up. So
Right.
Larry and
You own,
Sergey,
just to give an
billionaires.
example, you own a small piece of a bigger pie.
Right, exactly.
Smaller piece, yeah.
So option pools are great. You want to give people options in your business because more people want the stock, more people own the stock, and then that creates demand. You want to give advisors stock. You want to give investors stock. Now, and you know, the more people that want the stock, the more people that own the stock, the more valuable the company becomes. And ergo, even though your percentage declines, the value increases. So just to give you a simple example, if you have 100 shareholders and 20 of them are investors, you know, 70 of them are employees, and there's some founders and friends and family as the rest, maybe advisors, right? Suddenly you have an audience of 100 people that might want to buy your shares. When again, you are just you and your co-founder, you have an audience of you and your co-founder that might want to buy your shares. And I assure you that if your co-founder is like, I'm out, I want to buy your shares, you're going to buy them for dirt cheap. I mean, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I had like, yeah. This is like the to your earlier point, like about.
Yeah, no, I know. A hot button for you, yeah. And yeah. The other thing is, by the way, with early employees, like, don't be like, I'll send you guys the article on our blog, but from Lucas Bewald, like, he has gone through hell and back, and he understands boards and equity and hiring so well, and like, just read what he has to say, which is like, don't be stingy. Like, you're bringing a super valuable employee on, and they want, like, at the very early stage, and they want like 0.5% more. Great, give it to them. That's what vesting is for.
Right, you vest your employees as well.
Yeah.
So how does the employee option pool work was another question. What if an employee option is exhausted? The seed founders dilute if we need to expand the pool. So I really wouldn't worry too much about it. You know, the general rule of thumb is 20% reserved for your option pool at any one time. So when new investors come in, it essentially dilutes the pool down, and then you recap the pool back up to 20%, which creates more options to issue to employees. So, you know, if you have more than 20% to what Jessica was just saying, great. You know, that's awesome, right? Because you probably brought on an amazing team that wanted some more equity. I don't know if you have anything to add on the option pool, but.
No, I guess I'm just saying, like, don't be so concerned about little bits of equity at the beginning. To Adeo's point, like, dilution is typically a good sign.
Right. And so back to, you know, and in fact, that's sort of a negotiating strategy with your co-founder on equity. If to your point about the hard conversation, if you feel like you're the value and the leader and the person putting more work in, you need to have that hard conversation and be like, you know, I should probably be a X owner, 60%, and, you know, you should, what do you think about being a 40% owner, and have that discussion, right? But, you know, in that context, you should bring up and listen, we're going to bring on other people as well, and we're both going to dilute. You should have that conversation as well, right? Who else do you need to bring on, and what do you need to give them? Because it's not just you and your co-founder. It shouldn't be for very long. Right. So having the frank conversation about dilution early is good. You know, let's put it this way. Aaron Levy is like renowned, the founder of Box, for, you know, getting his company public and having like, you know, 5 or 6%. I think he's like one of the lowest ownership stakes of a founder that took his company all the way to the end game. But you know what? He's still worth a ton of money. So, just again, back to the ownership point, it doesn't really matter at the end
Right.
of the day.
Totally agree. Yeah. Right. And the question he has to ask himself, and I'm sure he feels fine about it, is like, where would I be if I hadn't given this person, the extra percentage bump? Where would we be?
All right. So let me go on to the sort of big final question. There's a lot of questions from the audience on this one too. How to handle challenges and conflicts. Hug it out. Right? So, I mean, this is tough, right? There's sometimes trust issues. There's sometimes work volume issues. There might be resentments. So I'm not the most interpersonal guy, in case you can't tell. So, Jessica, you seem a lot better than I am. What is your advice?
There's not like a way to work it out, and there's no I think one of the things was, how do you get past conflicts, or what are deal breakers? And it's like, the deal breakers you have to decide on. I don't know what your deal breakers are. But
I would say trust is a big deal breaker.
Yeah, usually, yeah.
I would say, look, if you're resentful over work, or you're resentful over they haven't quit, or you're resentful over you're doing boring work, that's resolvable, right? Because if you shouldn't allow yourself to get resentful, you should just open your mouth and resolve it. But if you lose trust, then it's over.
So I think the first thing you said feels obvious, but I think it's maybe not. The big thing is, like, if stuff is bothering you, bring it up and resolve it, because it's probably just going to keep festering and festering and festering. It doesn't mean like every little thing, but like if stuff is really bothering you, bring it up and resolve it. I think, again, I wrote this article a long time ago called How We Fight, and it's not that you have a disagreement. That is a foregone conclusion. You will disagree with your co-founder on many things. It's how you handle it. And mostly that you can resolve it quickly, because again, if you spend 3 more days fighting, that's 3 days you weren't productive on something. And then also that you can get past it. So like, once you make a decision, that's the decision, move on. Yeah, you're not sitting there like throwing a fit or like saying like, wow, you won last time. It's like, I mean, for lack of a better analogy, think of a marriage. Like, that wouldn't work well there. And then, the third thing is decide what you really care about. Not everything is important. Like, if you disagree but you don't have a really passionate point of view on it, then okay. And if you agreed already that this person is going to run engineering, and they're making a decision about engineering, there's a certain point at which you have to show that you trust them, and they can make those decisions. And if you don't, it's a problem.
I would say if you guys agree on a decision, that decision's final. Move on. Don't let it ever bug you again. Right? And if you're revisiting decisions all the time, that's an issue that you should talk about. Like, hey, we made this decision last week. Why are we talking about it again? That thing is done. But trust is the one where things are in trouble. So let me ask some questions from the audience here. What happened when your co-founder, this is from Mario, wants to change the focus of the project or product? How do you keep the balance in this case? So maybe they're pushing for a pivot or something you don't agree with. That's Jessica, you want to take that one up?
I mean, if you don't both want to pivot, you have a big problem.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
That's like a vision problem. I would say, okay, another big problem, trust and vision.
Like, if you don't both want to work on the same kind of thing, you have a pretty big problem. So you sort of have to do some soul searching and say, like, and we tell people this all the time, like, don't fall in love with just an idea. That doesn't mean don't work on something you don't care about, but the idea is probably going to morph or change a little bit. So I guess it depends
on the severity.
How big the pivot is, and if you care about the other thing. If you can't bring yourself to care about it, don't sign up for 7 more years of it.
I
And
see this
have a
happen
frank
all the time. Businesses need to pivot to make money, but then it's no longer in the interest sphere of one of the co-founders, and that's, you have to be honest, right? That could be a deal breaker, but you should you need to say that, like, if we want to go this route,
Mhm.
I'm no longer interested in doing that type of thing, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And I think
George,
also, by the way, like, I think there's two kinds of pivots. There's tweaks where you actually notice something happening and you say, "Oh, let's take advantage of this and tweak it, and tweak the business to go in that direction." Right? Like and there's no, this isn't working. We're totally scrapping it and starting like a totally new idea. In the latter, you should be sitting down and like talking about what the options are, and trying to mutually agree on the next quote unquote big idea. In the former, I mean, you both have to get on board, but it's less of a big decision.
George brought up another classic scenario. One founder wants to sell, the other one doesn't want to sell, but that maybe the founder doesn't have enough money to buy the other guy out. I see this. It's not as common because it's not like it's not like their buyer's like, okay, so boom, I'm in. Yeah, I want to sell. It's like, okay, who's the buyer? Nobody. You, because you're my co-founder.
Right. I mean, if you like have a legitimate buyer that's going to make you, the investors, and the employees money, you have to, in my opinion, have a good reason not to. Like, your Facebook. So you really have to believe in that. But I think if it's going to markedly change people's lives, then I think you should really.
Yeah, unfortunately, in private companies, the only buyer are the other shareholders, right? Which is
I thought you meant an acquisition.
No. I mean, right. If not, so if one founder wants to sell and there isn't a buyer knocking on your door,
okay.
You're not. That's not usually realistic, right? Like, you have to be an amazing business.
Yeah, if one person wants to sell and there's no one there to do it, and the board doesn't agree, then they should probably leave.
Right, and you know what's going to happen? Guess who's going to buy it? The other people that you've allowed in the company, and guess what they're going to pay for it? Next to nothing. Right. Yeah. Like, one of co-founders of a portfolio company just left. We bought their shares for peanuts. It was like the greatest deal on the planet. Because, there isn't this giant universe of buyers out there. It's whoever has money, give you a little bit of money, and boom, and you're out. So that's a toughie. If there's a big buyer in waiting and disagreement, that can be tricky, but usually the only buyers are going to be the other shareholders. And Edgar is asking, if you got to break up with a co-founder, what do you do, especially if it's a family member? So I've actually, I've had to do this, sort of. Like, my brother was kind of a co-founder, and I've, that's special. I think if it's not working out and you're a family member, and you can't have a frank conversation with them, there's a much bigger problem going on. So hopefully it actually makes it a little bit easier if they are a family member, because you have, a long-term bond, and you can be like, listen, it's not working out. But I know a lot of husband-wife co-founders, and I can talk more. What are your views quickly on that one?
This is hard. I never did anything with a family member, and quite frankly, I probably wouldn't. And not because I think it's right or wrong, just my family, no, I wouldn't do it. But that's just me, and I used to work for a husband-wife team, and it worked out great. So it really depends on you and your family. But I think it's again, it's one of those conversations that's never going to be easy. And I think, look, being an entrepreneur is super emotional. There's a lot of highs and a lot of lows. You have a lot vested in it, no pun intended. And I think one of the things that you need to remember is you don't want to burn bridges. You know, this community is pretty small, and so whether that means it's your family member or just someone that like you started a company with, if you can avoid burning a bridge, if no one really did anything wrong, you know, you really should. And so whatever the transition is that's going to be easiest for them, if they can stay on as an advisor, that's usually pretty standard, and they can feel like they still have, you know,
nobody likes getting dumped, though. I mean, to be blunt. So it's
yeah.
tough to be
Sometimes
like,
it's mutual, though, right?
yeah.
It just depends.
Here's
It's
what I would
not going to be an easy conversation, but I guess the point is like try to make it as amicable as possible. And I think thinking about what the other person might be feeling or might need, you know, is good. I mean, typically people aren't surprised.
Right. Well, the way that so sadly, I've probably fired thousands of people, right? Because I've run big companies and you fire people all the time. Anyway, so my general recommendation on this is like, know your stuff inside and out. No, you cannot over prepare for this conversation. You should know all your legal agreements and inside and out. You should retain potentially your own counsel, not company counsel, your own counsel, and say, okay, what do I need to be aware of here? The more prepared you are to have that conversation, the better it will go. Always, right? And to Jessica's point, you need to know the psychology of the person on the other side. Like, what is their motivator? What do they want? So a lot of times you can walk in there and be like, look, it's not working out, but now you need to know, you need to be like, you're about to play in the NBA playoffs and you've been working out, preparing your whole life for this moment, and you're going on the floor ready to win, right? And so you don't necessarily need to use all the things that you prepared, your knowledge of the agreements, your knowledge of the reasons why. I recommend exactly what Jessica, you go in there with an understanding of what they want and what their issues are, and you're like, it's not working out. I know you're doing this for this, this, and this reason. Let's find a way to separate and address your concerns. Here are my recommendations. What do you think? Now, a lot of times it's going to get ugly, and depending on how it gets ugly, because you're so prepared, you're just like pulling things off. It's like, well, I'm going to sue you. And if, well, in fact, you signed the agreement that says you can't really sue me. Well, I'm going to tell the media that you're blah, blah. You actually signed a non-disparagement agreement. You know, so you just need to have, your deck fully loaded with information, but make it a polite conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I think also, I mean, this is definitely true. Unless you're firing someone for something like they did wrong legally, it shouldn't be.
That happens too, by the way.
Yeah, it totally happens.
But I would still treat it the same way. I would still have
But I'm saying it shouldn't be your first conversation about something. Someone's not handling something. Someone is not, fulfilling responsibilities. Your first conversation isn't let's break up.
I caught my co-founder anonymously sending stuff to the board of directors implicating that there was fraud in the business to throw the company in turmoil and to do a takeover attempt. I just caught him ready.
Now you're scaring people.
So I walked in. We went to lunch. And I sat him down, and I had a folder in my hand. And we sat down at lunch. I put the folder on the table, and I slid it across. And I said, I know. And he's like, okay. Then it was over. So, there's a lot. You didn't even open the folder. I guess, but anyway, so, there's a lot. As you go in fully prepared, guns loaded, deck, fully stacked with all your stuff ready to go, and, and be polite and it will generally work out in your favor. It's a great way to end. So, Jessica, final closing advice. You've run a little over, but I've been having a lovely time.
Yeah, no, it's always fun. My final closing advice is just work together first. You're not going to sit down and hammer all of this out. So just make sure you're working on stuff. And you should be, and I said this before, sort of always looking for co-founders, working on side projects with people, etc. So you know what your deal breakers are. You know how things work and don't work for you. And the biggest thing is, if you don't want to do more than one thing, I think this is something we said. If you don't want to do more than one role, don't be a co-founder.
I'll add my piece of advice to you is there's no such thing as, not investing in the relationship on an ongoing basis. It's like a marriage. Like I have date night on Sunday, right? You need to go out to dinner. You need to do, because you're in work, pound, you're fighting fires, hiring people, doing all this crap together day in and day out. But if you don't go to the movies or have a dinner or do something social once a month, once a week or something like that, then the relationship just, it all becomes very negative, firefighting, day-to-day grind.
Yeah.
Versus, hey, there was a reason I chose working with this person, that I like this person. Yeah. And so it's like a marriage in that regard. It's not all about raising the kids per se. It's also about building that bond between the two.
Agree. Yeah. We have one of the things that we have now in the Bay Area is called core groups, which is small 6 to 10 person Series A plus groups, peer advisory groups that meet once a month. And someone in my group actually was talking about that recently, and they called it sort of, even a year and 2 years in at certain marks, having a sort of renewal of the vows, right? So and I love that idea because you think about it in a marriage, and so I don't necessarily think about it with co-founder stuff, and it's super important. And sometimes you might say all right, really, I don't want to renew the vows, so you know where you are then too. But being able to reset, because the business has probably markedly changed in 3 years. So what are we doing?
I mean, it's tough to keep, but listen, they're great examples. So Jessica, thank you so much. Big round of applause. Woo! Lovely. And for everyone on there, FounderDating, if you're looking for a co-founder, advisors, etc., and if you want to launch your company, please learn more at the Founder Institute as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.